So what we're going to do now is take the individual primals and take them down to further seaming and fully cleaning and denude of any fat and silver gristles. So this is the topside muscle, and again, as before, we need to clean up both sides of the product. So again, we have veins and arteries, we've got blood meat, silver gristles and pockets of fat. So we're just going to work through and remove these from this side before we start looking at trimming the other side. What we don't want to be doing is lifting the product up too many times. The judge is looking for nice, clean working on a nice clean block and working in a methodical order without jumbling the meat up too much when you're working. So we're trimming as we go, and we're also separating as we go. So we have our fine trim for mince, we have our larger pieces for dice, we have our fat, and we have our gristles and silver tissues. So when we come to silvers, they're removed and kept separate. Any veins or blood meat has to be removed. So we're just going to trim the coarser muscle that runs across the front of the top side, and by doing so we expose, again trimming that as we go, dice, mince, we expose the vein. So again, it's just point of the knife underneath and removing that through. That goes into the gristle. Checking the underside, connective fat. You may need to change your knife to a little bit of a longer knife that is better for skinning. So again, we're just holding the tissue, connective tissue up, and skinning this off lightly. Just trim around the muscle. Fat. And then just a little bit of flat silver on the edge. So again, we're just gently skinning that off. Fine membrane. So again, what we're trying to do is make it so we've got no deep cuts or slashes or incisions. So now we're going to turn the top side over and work from the other side. Now what we're going to do is remove this muscle here, the cap or Gracilis muscle. So the cap muscle is going to come off as an individual muscle, but I'm going to clean the top off first before we start separating it. So again, connective tissue, knife underneath, and just gently skinning off. So keeping the knife fairly flat onto the muscle. On this muscle, we're not looking to remove everything, but just the major thickest gristle. If you get a little bit that comes off with the meat and it's thin enough, that can go in the mince, but no major thick silvers or gristle should go in that trim. So again, just being careful to work around the muscle. When we're happy with that, we've got a pad of meat here where the two legs were separated. So again, lean trim, but we need to remove that thick silver pad of gristle. So you can see the colour difference. This is much darker muscle overlying a lighter muscle. So we're going to follow that seam and just peel back underneath the muscle. Again, just using point of the knife. Now what I want to do is try and keep as much of the connective tissue on the under muscle, and then that will help me or give me less trimming to do on this top thinner muscle. So as you can see, we've cut no muscle here and we've cut no muscle there. we've just followed through the natural seam, and then we're just going to follow that through and take that piece off. Let's just deal with this one first. This is the cap muscle, and trim that as we go. When we're happy with that, it goes into our dice box, trimming, and then following the contour of the muscle, clean the edge, and then any excess connective tissue on the inside we can trim off. And we're just taking care not to square this muscle up too much. The judges are looking for a natural shape of the muscle that came off the top side. So, and then that is our topside cap muscle, put to one side, ready for further use. Just again making sure we clear the block as we go. And now we can just finish off this topside muscle, the main block, and again lifting up fine connective tissue and just skinning this off. Again, just taking care not to cut into underlying muscle. Making a final check that we haven't got anything outstanding. Judge is looking for something nice and clean. So last final check, and when we're happy with that, there is our topside block. What we've got here is our topside and our cap. What we have though is another muscle. So we can actually separate that now into the main topside and the bullet muscle. So it's just following the line around here or around here, just with the edge of the knife, just the point end of the knife, following and scraping into the muscle seam. Now care is taken with this one because it can actually fade out, but then you get back into that seam. So it's just taking that little bit of care and attention to take out that center bullet muscle nice and cleanly, find a little bit of trimming, and that gives us our three main muscles of the top side: the main center muscle, the bullet, and the top side cap. So now we're going to work on the silver side muscle. So this is seamed out. It's two major muscles. It could be three if we follow down the silver, but for this exercise we'll just break it down into the two main muscles, the salmon cut and the silver side flat. So as with all the muscles, we need now just to remove the external fat and silver gristles. So I'm going to take off the salmon cut first. So again, I'm just following along the line of the seam. So there's our salmon cut removed from the flat. And as all the muscle, we're trying to do as clean as we can without any incisions or slashes. The judges are looking for a nice, smooth, clean primal muscle. Just skinning that nicely, keeping the flat of the knife onto the muscle. So this, at the moment, is a little bit of connective tissue. So it goes into the fat, checking all around. If there's a ragged edge, we just carefully remove that. A little bit of flat silver. Final check that we're happy for the judge to see that muscle. So that is our salmon cut, and now we can move on to our silver side flat. Now this is all fine connective tissue, so a little bit of meat is coming off that, but not masses, just to make it nice and clean. Always work with the meat so that you're comfortable the way you're working. You can see where you're going at all times. So when you're happy with your fat trim, Final scraping over just to check. And what we have got is our silver here. We need to remove that. So again, it's point of the knife under as thin as you can. Lift that up so you've not done any damage underneath, and then it's just a nice fine gentle skin of that silver, so it's just the silver coming off. And again, we're not looking to dig in to the muscle to remove any further silver, we're just taking surface silvers off. Finally, this side, it's just a matter of removing the excess of this last silver, but again, the thickest part, but not going deep into the muscle. Finish off the underside, bit of a thicker gristle there. So again, just taking it steady to remove the thickest part, and this should be the last little bit. Just have a casting eye again just over what you've done. Make sure that you've done everything you need that the judge has asked for. Nice and clean, smooth, no ragged edges, and we've removed the excess fat and gristle. So there's our silver side flat and our silver side salmon cut, totally denuded of fat and gristle. So the next primer we're going to do is the pork chump or the rump muscle. Been seamed out, a little bit of work needing to it, just cleaning the underside of the muscle up, so any little bits of ragged edge or connective tissue. We don't want to be cutting too deep into this muscle, so we just need to keep it nice and clean. There is a small coarse muscle that runs across the top. Again, just the tip of the knife, that loose coarse muscle comes off. A little bit of thick silver on that, but then this is going for dice or mince, so again, just excess gristle off, and then that can go into our dice trim. Knife goes under the silver. Change a knife, longer blade, so I can just skin that nice and lightly, so we're not cutting underside of the muscle, it's just gliding over the muscle and removing the silvers. Coming down to a little bit of gristly area. This is where the rump was attached to the leg bone, so again, thick silvers, thickest part of those needs to be removed. Plus, important, trimming my trim, a little bit of meat left on that piece of gristle. I don't want lean gristle, that's what the judges are looking for. They just want to see gristle on its own, fat on its own, and meat on its own. When we're happy with the underside, it's just then quickly on the outside of the muscle, again just trimming surface fat, and then as with all the muscles, we just finally check to make sure we've covered everything. And there is our rump heart or the pork chump muscle. So this is our knuckle or thick flank from the leg and chump of pork, and this is now ready for further trimming. This consists of three main muscles. You can see the seam here, and we've got the centre block and a coarser underlying group of muscles that was attached to the main leg bone. So we're going to trim this down, clean it off, working as we go and separating it into the three main muscle blocks. Again, important that we keep our knives nice and sharp, and we're just looking at fine trim. So again, I'm going to trim as I go, working my way down using the weight of the meat. Very fine connective tissue. What I'm doing is just working this little bit off. I can see the line of the muscle between the two muscles. If I skin over that, it should show me the seam clearly. I just want to clean the inside of the muscle. So this is the bone sheath where the bone was attached to the muscle. Again, it's important that we skin that off and remove it. Right, so to separate this now, we're going to just scrape down between the seams of the muscle so that I'm riding over the silver sheath of the muscle below. And if I use my finger, I can find that seam. Just turn that round. You just check in to make sure that we're following that seam around, and that will come out just here on the silver, like so. Now this one we just clean up. It's mainly going to be used for dice or stir fry. So we need to save the larger piece of this muscle group. The smaller part of it can go into our mince. So the judges are looking for you to separate the muscles into their right category. So smaller bit mince, the solid block, we'll keep that to one side and use that. The remainder, which is two main muscles, the centre bullet and the cap or the outside muscle. So again, we can trim as we go along. Silver gristle that we've just scraped along, so working alongside that muscle inside here. So when we're happy we've cleaned the outer surface, we can now just follow down the edge of the muscle. As you can see here, we're starting to get onto a thicker silver, so we just scrape along to finally separate them. A little bit of excess trim on the end. There's nothing glaring into the judge's eye. A big wedge of fat or a big lump of silver. And finally our third piece, the outer muscle or the cap, and that gives us our three main muscles from our knuckle or thick flank. So now we're on to our final piece, which is the heel muscle from the end of the silver side by the hock that we left the bone in. So again, this is mainly three muscles: the core muscle, or we know as the mouse muscle, and the two side muscles. These will be just cleaned up of connective tissue, fat and silvers, and mostly used for dice or mince. So it's just a matter of working our way down, trimming as we go. Now this is a hard working centre muscle, so we're not going to be able to remove all the gristle from it. Cleaning as we go, so we don't have to keep revisiting everything. So when we're happy on inside, we'll just move our way onto the outside for a minute. Again, it's just being careful that we just skin the connective tissue off rather than heavily cutting. So this is where we now scrape down the silver of the underlying muscle. So you can see the gristle, we're just laying on top of that. So that's one of the outside muscles. Now we need to remove the silver from both sides, because underneath this is a nice fine textured muscle. So that's the one side, silver gristle from this side. This side the gristle's thicker. Final bit, there's a outside muscle. Again, you're not going to be able to remove all the gristle off this. It's just basically the heaviest bit, because it will have the thick gristle running through the centre. So we're just removing the heaviest of the gristle. Final last bit of silver. Final check. That was our three main muscles from the heel. At the end of your competition, you just need to make sure that the trims that you've accumulated, you've separated, kept them all apart. We have fine trim that is suitable for mince. We have the larger trim that is suitable for dice. and we have our fat, and we have our connective tissue. And please remember, in competition, the judge could turn out the tray to check through it. So just be aware that you don't put anything in that tub